2, 1.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest Multimodal Connect webinar. Today we'll be diving into the world of sustainability and specifically taking a look at the circular economy and how, by understanding it, you'll be able to get some benefit for your business and benefit the wider world. It's a complex subject, but we have a panel for you that, well, they are experts and will be answering your questions and giving you a clue as to what this involves and how you can benefit from it. You're watching the webinar on our Swapcard platform. This enables you to ask questions. There's a button to the right, so please post your questions there, and also allows you to network with other attendees. You just send them a message, swap a business card, and you can even arrange Zoom calls after the webinar with them. So please take advantage of that. Anyway, to kick things off, I'm going to introduce your moderator for today, Dr. Sally Eaves. Sally is a senior policy advisor for the Global Foundation of Cyber Studies and Research and CEO of Aspirational Futures, which enhances inclusion and diversity in education and technology. She's a highly experienced Chief Technology Officer, a professor in advanced technology, and a global strategic advisor. She's an author and speaker on digital transformation, cloud computing, cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, 5G, AI, blockchain, culture, skills, sustainability, and social impact. Wow. Sally, over to you to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction as well. I really, really appreciate that. And such a pleasure to be hosting today's session and on a subject, I must say, is very close to heart. And I wholeheartedly believe this can create shared value, basically for business and society as well. So before I'm going to provide a bit of context to the session today, I'd love to take a moment now just to bring forward our fantastic panel. And we have a really stellar lineup today. I'm going to get everyone just to give a short introduction. I always think it's better to come from the person themselves and kind of why they're here, their role, and what they're passionate about towards sustainability. So first, perhaps if we go to Giles, if you could take a moment to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, just as we started talking, somebody started printing something in my office. Hang on a sec.
This is fine. It just proves.
Sorry, I'm back. Don't worry. It's a problem with having kids still doing homework at home and start printing stuff. Hello. So my name is Giles. How are you doing? I'm the Group Supply Chain Director at Sky. I've been there for about 9 years. What that means is that the team are responsible from essentially component to customer. So we source components that go into our products, set-top boxes and routers and so on. And then we find factories to make those things in the Far East and then manage the sort of inbound supply chain into the UK, Germany and Italy. And then the ongoing sort of supply chain shipping onto our 24 million customers that we have around Europe. Quick little bit about Sky. Most people know Sky. We're the largest pay TV company in Europe. We have about 24 million customers, as I've just said. With regards to this topic, it's really important to us at Sky. We were the first media company in 2006 to go carbon neutral. And we then moved on to sort of working with WWF on things like the rainforest. And then moved on to sort of single-use plastic sort of awareness and also reduction from our own supply chain. So sustainability is at the core of our business and what we do. And so really looking forward to getting into a really good conversation this afternoon to talk about some of the issues that we've got today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. Thank you. And perhaps Claire, if we go over to you next. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Claire Walters. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Unipart. So we operate across logistics, manufacturing and consultancy. So in my role, I look after our 4 sectors across automotive, technology, health and utilities and consumer, and our international markets in terms of Asia Pacific and the US and the UK. Also look after areas like digital innovation and trying to think about the future and hence my interest from both a business and a personal perspective actually in sustainability, something that certainly I'm passionate about at home as well in terms of what can we all do to contribute our own little bit in terms of turning the tide. I'm also super excited about the opportunity to have a bit of a debate and see if we can try and move that forward a little bit this afternoon. Thank you.
Superb, and I love that around professional and personal coming together. It's that hybridity word again, isn't it? Absolutely, brilliant stuff. So now, Dr. Alex, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Hello, and my name is Dr. Alexandre Metreoli. I'm from Coventry University, assistant professor in operations and supply chain management. Also, I'm leading a course in supply chain leadership professional. It's integrated degree apprenticeship. So this area, the circular economy and generally speaking, sustainability is very much embedded within Coventry University strategy and the goals in terms of education, how we engage with the society and with different businesses. So that's why it's really a very important area, and I'm happy to be here. So thank you very much for having this opportunity. So yeah, looking forward to further engagement. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. And perhaps next, Nicola, I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, thanks, Sally. So I'm Nicola Cass. I'm the Technology Sector Director over at Unipart, working with Claire and with Giles on forward and reverse logistics. I've spent 25 years in the supply chain and logistics industry in 3PL, and over 20 years of that with technology customers like Sky, great customer, of course, and Vodafone, 3 major OEMs, Virgin. And sort of my baptism into circular economy and sustainability was back in sort of early 2000s. We started in repair and refurbishment, and back in the days when life was simple and we were doing Nokia 6210s and they had black, grey screens and black letters, and life was simple. But even then, the sort of the circular economy and reuse was coming to the fore. And obviously, we've been on a journey with many of our customers, including Sky, in terms of supporting them on their sustainability and circular economy goals. So it is great to be here today and to listen to what the audience questions are and impart what we can of how to move forward on these topics.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And just to echo that point about audience questions, that we really, really welcome that. So thank you, Nicola. Appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, really want to hear from you, Charles. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm Charles Stewardson. So good afternoon or good morning all, depending where you are. I work for Apcudo, which is an American-based company. We're a software and automation company, so a little bit different. But I've spent, a bit like Nicola was saying there, brought back some memories that many, many years, probably about 30 years now, working in supply chain and service engineering and repair companies, and seeing that gradual shift from, oh, it's here, let's repair it and stick it on a shelf, to, well, actually, what do we do with this thing? Can we get value from it, and then even more towards circularity, actually, can we give it a second life, a third life? Can we do something useful with it? I read something the other day, which I thought was fascinating, because we work largely in connected devices. And it said that if you could extend the life of the connected devices in the world by 1 year, just 1 year, it's the equivalent carbon impact to taking 2 million vehicles off the road. So, you can look at that and think, well, so how as a software company do we enable our clients, which are supply chain companies and mobile carriers, et cetera, to actually achieve that?
Fantastic. A great example of bringing that to life. I think that's a superb one. Thank you, Charles. Appreciate that. So before we go into our first questions, what I'm going to do now is just set the scene a little bit more about some of my thoughts about sustainability and around circular economy in more general. So for me, the first thing I'd love to say is sustainability is not a nice to have. It's not something that can be on the outside. It has to be embedded in all we do. So I would class this as a strategic imperative today for business. And we're seeing already things around environmental and social governance, or ESG, becoming a growing concern for business leaders, but also for other areas as well. So we're seeing that for government, we're seeing it for regulators, investors, standard bodies, and stakeholders right across the supply chain, but also for consumers. I wrote recently about conscious consumerism, and that's what I think we're seeing. I think the COVID pandemic has accelerated that awareness. People have had more time to think and reflect, where has that come from, particularly around food supply chains, but also pharmaceuticals would be a great example of that as well. So we've got this increasing impact consciousness, which is affecting not just expectations, but also actual behaviours. I'm seeing evidence of people walking away from products and services and organisations, both from that consumer fit, but also as a supplier, also as an employee, frankly, as well, if you haven't got that values alignment. So kind of drawing into something Claire said earlier on in that intro about professional and personal values coming together. And I think we're also at a particular moment in time. We've got COP26 coming later this year, the big UN summit around climate action in Glasgow. And people are seeing the environmental effect of less travel over the last year, that awareness, as I was saying, about where things come from. So for me, there are 3 R's at play here: reflect, reframe, and reimagine. And there's some other 3 R's I'll come on to in a moment as well. So drawing into this a little bit more, as I said, circular economy is where we need to be. And it's something that's talked about a lot. I think sometimes there are different definitions around there, a little lack of clarity, and also a lack of actualization in some areas. So at the moment, roughly, depending on which research you look at, we're looking at 8.6% of the world that can be classed as being sustainable in terms of the amount of reuse around minerals, metals, fossil fuels, etc., and things like biomass as well, that are actually cycled back in. E-waste, I would say, is another huge issue of our time at the moment, a real growing concern. And overall, based on the latest comparable data in 2019, over 92 billion tonnes of materials were extracted and processed, and that's contributing hugely, around half, to CO2 emissions worldwide. So this is something we have to think about here and now. And I use the pandemic as a comparable. If we can come together in the same way we've seen different sectors do so around government, academia, civil society, individuals, and big organizations alike around fighting the pandemic, let's harness that contagion of change around coming together for things like climate impact and sustainability too. So if we look at one of the most classic definitions, which is by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, incredible work, and thoroughly recommend looking at a website for further information. They describe circular economy as designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and minerals in use, and regeneration of natural systems. So it's really moving away from take, make, and waste, this linear model of economy, to one of the 3 R's, a different 3 R's now: reuse, repair, and recycle. And I'm going to add a 4th shortly too. I think to put this into context, I always like to use something that's really kind of everyday and accessible. So white goods would be an example of that. Your average washing machine, for example, you have a huge amount of energy that's consumed and materials that go into making these machines. And if you look at a refrigerator today, all the different component parts there, they're not always easily fixable or replaceable. So if you have one failure, often it's the entire appliance is actually thrown away in order to buy a new one. That's kind of the opposite of circular economy principles. If you can get that part repaired, the owner not only doesn't have to have all the hassle, the expense, the inconvenience of buying a new one, and then all the delivery and installation costs, etc., but also they're going to remain and be loyal to the same manufacturer rather than going to another competitor, for example. I think it's an interesting way of looking at the shared value of embracing circular economy. So if that fridge is designed and manufactured with that in design, and for continual usage, then we're seeing circular economy right in action, which is where we need to be. And also after this as well, we've put together a lot of different examples of circular economy in action. I would think real world examples are best. So if anybody wants more about that, feel free to ask at the session. One example of this already though, would be an example of Asda George. And I love this one. They're selling second-hand clothes in store. And I love that because again, it's very accessible. We can relate to it. It's something, we all buy clothes, we're all doing our weekly shopping. So it's something that makes circular economy come home to us wherever we are. I'd like to stress as well the role that technology can play in this. Obviously, I come from a tech background myself. One example would be around IoT. So if we look at manufacturing and also supply chain, there's so much we can do with sensors and devices to track and make that supply chain traceable, but also to improve efficiencies as well, detecting, preventing issues before they occur, better design around buildings, around lorry logistics, everything, all the way through the life cycle. And that's the whole point. It has to be right from the beginning, right to the end. I think sometimes the focus is always on that bottom 1% around recycling. So we can use these sensor-based technologies, these integrated technologies, to help us do better, reduce consumption when we don't need to. So I think that's really interesting as well. And again, it's not just a technology conversation. This is about tech, about process, about methodology, culture and skills, all these things coming together to make a difference. I mentioned 3 R's twice already. So my 4th R is that one about reimagine. And before we go to the next questions, I wanted to put that into context. As I said, there's so much we can do if we come together to combat these biggest challenges of our time. One example I've been involved in, and this is around Dell, they've done some great work in this area back from 2013. There's 2 things I wanted to stress. One is the power of partnership, and I know we're going to talk about that a lot today. So what they did, they partnered with a startup. This is basically in India, in one of the most polluted cities in the country. They were dealing with problems around diesel extraction, all the soot that was polluting the city. Massive, massive problem. But they turned turn that challenge into a huge opportunity and success. They partnered with them, extract that soot and made it into paint that could be used around packaging design and embedded that into that particular supply chain. So that's one example of, big company, small startup coming together, using something negative and making it into something positive. And another one as well was extracting gold and other minerals from motherboards as one example, and then turning it into jewelry, working with a particular partner there. And not only was that providing a new example of reuse, but I love the metaphor there. Again, literally circular around like earrings or whatever else that they were making. And I think that's a very powerful way to carry a message as well. I always think it's not just what you do and like the data, for example, it's also the narrative that you tell with that to try and get that buy-in, that communication, that passion to come together and do good. So I wanted to stress those two examples because they're ones that I've been personally involved in. So for me, ecosystem is critical to making circular economy a reality. And I know we've got some great examples of partnership and ecosystem in action across our amazing panelists today. So at that point, I will stop talking because I love this subject and I might talk too much. So we'll dive into our first question. So this is the first one. We're going to look at company objectives. I'd love to know more across our panel around how your company objectives are embedding in sustainability. And perhaps first I'll go to Giles on this one.
Cool. Okay, so at the end of 2020, we passed a milestone, actually, it was quite significant for us, which was to remove all single-use plastic from our supply chain products and operations, which is a really great achievement for everybody, especially given the last year we had to do it in lockdown. During that time, we started to think about what we wanted to do next. And I think with what we characterize internally within Sky as the climate emergency, we had a look at where we were in terms of our carbon footprint as a business, looking more broadly, obviously, at our scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions, and decided instead of the general company the government guidance of 2050 that we would set ourselves a target of 2030 to get to net zero carbon. So we kicked that off last year, and for Sky, there's quite a lot of areas where we need to focus on. So the bulk of our carbon footprint is our products in customers' homes, and then the next element is with supply chain. So from manufacturing all the way through to sort of processing product. So of our carbon footprint, there's about 25–30% that sits within the supply chain that I'm now focused on for the next 9 years to get down to sort of at least 50% reduction, so that we can then look at what sort of longer term sort of offsetting that there might be. But in addition to that, and more specifically to supply chain, there are 2 other areas that we're focused on. One is on human rights in our supply chain. So we have a number of sort of sub-objectives within that area, but it's really carrying into our supply chain, which is obviously global, sort of focus on things like modern slavery, how workers are being treated, but also start to elevate how they're being employed and how they're being looked after. So for example, in our tier 1 suppliers, putting stuff in like people surveys and engagement surveys and all that kind of stuff. And then in terms of further down the supply chain, looking at how we manage sort of things like conflict minerals and so on. And then the last bit, and really to sort of, to an extent, the focus of this webinar is then what we're doing around resource efficiency in our supply chain. So we talked about single-use plastic, which is fundamentally just a waste product. So we've removed that. And it's really now starting to look at what else we can do. Now, fortunately for Sky, we changed our model a few years ago so that it's effectively like a service or a rental model, if you like. So we recover most products, so we continue to use them. But what's becoming more relevant now is really the design of our products. We work very closely with our hardware engineers, given that we have repair within the supply chain activity, to look at design for repair, how easy it is to disassemble things, how easy it is to separate different substances if we do have to recycle. So all of that is a continued focus for us in terms of resource efficiency. So those are the 3 main things really. So it's carbon efficiency, resource efficiency, and human rights in our supply chain.
Fantastic. I love that. I love the fact that you're also talking about that embedding from design, and also your kind of sphere of influence really over supply chain partners as well, and really encouraging that behaviour. That's fantastic. And perhaps Claire, if I come to you now, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing at Unipart and obviously the partnership here.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, our role by and large is enabling our customers to try and achieve their sustainability objectives as much as it is our own, obviously, because the supply chain is such a core part of that. So from our perspective, we are very much a privately owned company, largely by our employees. We tend to sign up to, like Sky, kind of long-term partnerships with our customers. So we do very much pride ourselves on being very much value-driven and trying to do the right thing for all of our stakeholders. So we've got a number of streams underway, in many cases mirrored by the different sectors and customers that we operate in. So we took on the challenge from Sky, actually, who were fantastic in terms of plastic, in terms of giving us, before really it was on the radar and being talked about widely, that big challenge of helping them go on the journey and remove it from their supply chain. And we were able to take that knowledge and learning that we gained from that journey and share that with all our other customers across other sectors, which was fantastic. So we've worked really hard to remove plastic from the supply chain of ourselves and our customers. Similarly, we've got carbon targets. So we've been working with the Carbon Trust to measure our carbon footprint, and now developing a roadmap in terms of our own journey towards zero. In the automotive sector, the big focus for us is on electric vehicles, and we've been involved, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on, but just in that thinking about the whole reverse loop as that challenge unfolds and ever greater challenges are underway. Clearly in technology, as we've alluded to, there's a huge focus on reverse logistics and the circular economy and keeping devices going for longer. In our role as looking after the NHS supply chain, that there's clearly huge targets there, which we're working hard to support and help the NHS on its journey, because actually as the supply chain bit, you realise what a core component we are of the NHS hitting their targets, no pressure. So yeah, I think it's fair to say we have a huge range of targets and challenges across the piece, but most of that is around really trying to work in partnership with our customers and support them on their journeys.
Absolutely, like enablement is really coming to mind from everything you're saying there. Absolutely, and I love that around that wider knowledge sharing as well. So valuable, and addressing measurement. I always think that can be one of the challenge areas with sustainability. But the fact you're talking about the carbon credits, carbon trust, but also things like science-based targets, so helpful in terms of helping this to scale. So brilliant, thank you, Claire. I love that. It's fantastic. I think maybe at this point, Alex, could I bring you in now to have a look from? I think it'd be a great point to look at it from a university perspective and what's happening at Coventry.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. So at our university, we have different agenda. Of course, I will speak more from educational perspective. We have the main goal to incorporate sustainable development goals, so 17 goals within our courses. At least we try to have 2 or 3 of those goals embedded within our teaching. So to explain to students why it is good, how to achieve those, and how it looks not only from theoretical perspective, but also from industry perspective. So for this, we invite different guest lectures. We have different industry field trips and projects. And also from research perspective, we have a Center for Business in Society. And within the center, we have cluster which looks at sustainability from circular economy, from ethical consumption, and so on. So it's very much embedded here, and mainly it again spans from the pillars of education. We have Curriculum 2025, which again looks at these aspects. Also, for example, within the supply chain course which I'm leading, so it's this apprenticeship course, we have one of the goals which mentions that the graduates needs to demonstrate the knowledge of sustainability, ethical, social responsibility, and technological aspects within their operations from logistics perspective, procurement, and supply chain. Once it comes to logistics and supply chain, we are also very much looking at responsible education. So we are trying to develop leaders for the future. So the leaders will be working, some of them perhaps within the companies which are presented here. our colleagues, and yeah, from Sky, from Unipart, and from Apkudo, why not? But yeah, generally we are trying to develop industry-ready graduates which are very sustainability and ethically oriented, so they can deliver those objectives further and work on this alongside with some other colleagues.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm incredibly passionate about education, so I couldn't agree more with supporting those skills for the future. And Gen Z in particular have been, I think, leading the way in many areas in terms of that conscious consumerism, actually. So fantastic. I look forward to hearing more about that, Alex. Thank you. And I'd love to go to you, Charles, as well next to explore more from your perspective. A great diversity and experience across this panel. Thank you, Charles.
You're welcome. So, I mean, for us, as I mentioned, we're a software company. So a bit like Unipart are an enabler, we're an enabler too. We're an enabler across the supply chain, whether that's directly to manufacturers, whether it's to supply chain companies, which manufacturers and service companies often outsource to anyway to actually do these things, or whoever else. But when Apkudo comes from a background of testing devices on platforms. So we work with all the major OEMs long before the products are released to say how these devices are going to behave in a certain way. So we have all that very objective data at the start to say this is how we anticipate the device is going to behave, its pros and cons and everything else in its given environments. What was missing and why Apkudo went into the reverse logistics side was that ground truth of how does it behave in its life and potentially at the end of its life, and how do you extend that life? And when you look at that supply chain, it's a massively growing area. There's a huge growth in second user, second life devices because of all the reasons we just said. And there's a lesser growth in new devices, for a whole variety of reasons. They're expensive. There's not the big leap from model to model, from generation to generation like there used to be. And I think generally the market has kind of thought, well, the device is there to access something else. It's not necessarily for the device itself. So, you've got this double-digit compound annual growth rate in second user devices, yet you've got a horribly convoluted reverse supply chain that's really subjective. So we kind of looked at that and said, well, how do we make that objective? How do we get proper quality data in the reverse supply chain so we can then feed that back in and allow intelligent decisions to be made about what do we do with this device right now to extend its life, to make it more valuable? Because as much as everybody wants to do the right thing and wants to be circular, environmentally friendly and everything else, if the economics don't add up, that's a huge drag. It just won't happen. So our objective really is to make the economics add up for our clients by using information, not data. The data needs to become useful information. The data by itself is useless. So the reverse logistics data is the ground truth of the forward logistics, and then we can go and say, right, here, this is what you should do with that device to maximize it, to act as the catalyst for the circularity of those devices.
Absolutely, you're spot on with that word enablement at the front. I totally see that. And there's that facilitation role, isn't it? As you were saying, so many people want to do the right thing, but actually having that facilitation in that process makes all the difference in the world. So some fantastic examples there, Charles. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. So I think at that point, it'd be a good notion now to look into the principles behind circular economy. And I think if I could go to you, Alex, on this to drill into it a little bit more from an academic perspective.
Right, so thank you, Sally. Actually, I need to be a little bit brief here because we have so many wonderful examples from our other members of the panel. Just briefly saying, so circular economy usually is trying to imagine that the Earth is like a spaceship, so we don't have any other resources except the ones which are in the Earth. So we are trying to have economy and the environment in circular terms, so which means we need to imagine that what we can do in such a way that in the end we don't have too much resources input within the production systems, within logistics supply chain systems, and how to also extend the life cycle of the products in order to achieve lower waste, higher value for the products. And another aspect is also what of those products and which of their components can be recycled, and some of them can be reused, and how to avoid those recycling process not to have chemicals or hazardous materials bringing back to the consumers, because based on what are in those products and in those like recyclable materials, they might end up again in new products which can be related with some food products or products which touch the food, or it can be related with products which people touch or maybe they breathe and so on. And also how to make sure that recycling will be less on the combustion, so we have less emissions to the environment. And on the other hand, from logistics perspective, like including logistics service providers, how to make transportation, warehousing more environmentally friendly in a way to not compromise on lead time, on like safety, like quality of logistics in general, and how to make sure that consumers get right product in the right time, but which was not part of logistics definition, but now it is like with lowest environmental impact. Yeah, so just briefly, but perhaps our panel will be evaluating all this more from practical perspective. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. And I love what you're saying there. For me, it's kind of that systemic approach, putting my research hat on for a minute. It's more that, looking at feedback loops, for example, viewing products as part of systems. It's that holistic approach that was coming to the fore for me. I do some work around quadruple helix, even if I can say it. I think that's a really interesting lens. If anybody's interested in looking at that ecosystem approach and kind of how to make that happen from a research point of view, I can share some links around that as well if anybody's interested in that. But as Alex was saying, I think what we'll do is draw on some practical examples now, because we've got such a rich depth of talent and experience here. So I'm going to draw onto that. So really focusing in on collaboration. We know this is critical. We've mentioned it a few times already, is this enablement for circular economy in action. So what I'd love to drill into now is from a sustainability perspective, some key examples that the panelists are working on so that we can share and learn from that. So first of all, I'll go to Charles first on this one. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, you shocked me there. Hit my mute button. So, I mean, we're working on a lot of examples, mainly in the States at the moment. We're just launching in Europe this year. Excuse the plug. But in the States, we're working predominantly with mobile phone operators and supply chain companies, or their supply chain companies. And really, there's insurance companies as well, there's big traders, there's all sorts of companies in that whole ecosystem. But if I can call out a couple of examples, a big one would be one of the USA's big three carriers. I won't say who it is, who have one of the USA's biggest supply chain companies working for them, and we've now got three sets of automation that have gone into their plant. Now, automation for us, I said we're a software company, and people say, why on earth are you talking about automation or robotics? We're a software company. Our chief exec, our founder, calls them appliances, not robots. And the reason he calls them appliances is because they're an appliance to get good data. Because without the appliance, you've got people doing it. And you've got people running manual tests or semi-automated tests, and you get 60, 70% accuracy, and the data is you put bad data into the system, you're not going to then be able to make good dispositioning decisions on the back of it. So we've now got 3 lines of these robots, these appliances in this company. Doing 300 units an hour of testing, grading, cleaning units. It's phenomenally efficient in terms of operational efficiency. That gives the client obviously huge cost savings, which is the economic model I mentioned, that you have to just tick that box to make somebody go for it. But also, of course, what it does is it has its own environmental positives in terms of you haven't got hundreds of staff working on that site with all the things that brings. The other side to it is that we're then connecting that up, we're connecting the market up on the back of that. So I mentioned a very convoluted returns market or reverse logistics market. That means you've got devices that come out, they go to auction, they get broken down, they go to somebody else, they get broken down, they go to somebody else. Every step in that chain is actually a drag on the likelihood of that device being or reaching circularity, because you're adding cost, you're adding delay, and you haven't got the velocity in the supply chain. This will actually directly link, this system we're putting in directly links supply and demand. So you're speaking to supply chain companies, they're looking at it thinking, oh, hang on a minute, we can actually start linking global markets together, and maybe we can just drop ship. You don't need to move these things all over the world to its final destination. So that's, the customers we're working with have seen huge benefits, not just economically, but also their eye is actually on the bigger goal of how to achieve much more circularity and take so much carbon waste out of the supply chain. And we're now doing that with 2 or 3 other customers across the States as well. And we're bringing a more right-size model to Europe, because Europe is far more fragmented than the USA, of course. So we've had to right-size and shift that model so it works from a point of view of software and hardware to bring those solutions to the European market.
Fantastic. I love that. I love the fact you mentioned about reducing organizational drag, particularly around sustainability elements. That keeps coming up probably alongside complexity as one of the kind of top 3 challenges I'm seeing at the moment in various conversations. So I think that's fantastic. And also just every example you were saying there was really that shared value model in action, wasn't it? Which I really think that can be achieved, and you're showing how that can be actualized. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Charles. Really appreciate that. I think I'd love to bring in Nicola now. That would be fantastic to hear from you and some of the projects you're involved in.
Sure, thanks for that, Sally. So look, as everybody's talked about, collaboration is absolutely critical, and it's not just collaboration with us and our customers. It can be with competitors and with the manufacturers, downstream suppliers. You know, we've all got to work in this together. And picking up on sort of returns and repairs, which is sort of critical to the circular economy, and work we do, and work we do with Virgin, but many technology customers do this too, and the OEMs, that the work that is done on diagnostics up front, you know, you call the Sky call center or you call one of our technical call centers, and that work that's done to actually support customers to resolve their issues in their own time is actually really critical in keeping those, you know, devices with the customer, and that sort of unnecessary loop that we all get of returns are actually not faulty or repairs are actually not faulty, and that shouldn't be forgotten about. And a lot of work has gone into that over the last sort of 10 years, and we continue to work on that. Another great example is us with Virgin and another logistics supplier that supports Virgin. We worked on reusable packaging such that the packaging goes out on the outbound is a packaging that can be used for a return, that can be used for a repair, that we can also, you know, keep going around the loop, which again is, you know, collaboration between competitors and customers, and that kind of thing that's going on there, really, really important. And when we get returns and repairs back into our warehouse, we do use, you know, software and intelligence to try and decide where that goes for the least amount of cost for the best result for that device, which is never to be disposed of, but is always, you know, should we repair it, should we refurb it, should we trade it, where should it go? And we use what we call dynamic disposition to do that, particularly for Virgin. Another quick small example, I guess, the circular economy to use a different customer. So we did a lot of work with Centrica over the last couple of years, looking at their reverse supply chain. The utilities industry is one that, you know, it is developing rapidly at the moment from an industry that probably didn't develop very rapidly for a very long time. So they're developing rapidly at the moment, and we went in to have a look at their reverse supply chain to see what we could see, and we could see that they were recycling the PCBs that came out of boilers and not repairing or reusing them, and because they thought it was too difficult to test them or repair them. So we went in, devised a test strategy, used flying probe technology to support them with the repair. We figured out that about 30% of them were no fault found, and therefore, you know, no issues with them and could go back into the supply chain. And then we devised a repair strategy for the ones that had a fault, replacing components on PCBs, again, keeping really valuable materials in the loop. And we repair the majority of those now that go back into their supply chain, saving them money and keeping those sort of precious commodities in the loop. So, you know, there are lots of practical things that companies can do to support the circular supply chain, as a couple of examples from me there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love those. I love the fact you've chosen quite different kind of sector examples as well, and different levels of maturity around supply chain sustainability. I think that's fantastic to show what can be achieved wherever you're starting from. And that Centrica one I was reading up on earlier, I think it's fantastic. The numbers involved in that in terms of saving is absolutely huge. So really, really impressive. I think now if we go to Giles, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So a couple of things. I think, given that Unipart are on the call with us, I think there's a couple of standout things that Sky and Unipart have collaborated on. So I think it's almost before my time, actually. The target was set of 0 to landfill of any waste that came back, and Unipart have been central to delivering that for all of the waste that comes back in the Sky supply chain. If you imagine 4,000 field service engineers making in excess of 3 million visits a year, generated quite a lot of waste and stuff that would come back. So what we did was set a target of 0 to landfill, and Unipart pretty much worked on that. Not quite on themselves, but a lot of initiative from their own teams, with us sort of helping and assisting in some areas to deliver that goal many years ago, actually now. And we mentioned around the single-use plastic. I think it's fair to say we wouldn't have been able to do that without Unipart sort of working with us in our core warehouse to make sure that all of our products and our supply chain activities were done without single-use plastic. The beauty of that is the sort of the ripple effect that has, that I'm sure Claire will talk about if you asked her, that they were able to have those conversations with other sort of customers that they have in their facilities. Sort of moving on to other areas of our supply chain, it's quite an interesting one because we are heavily vertically integrated. So we do a lot of the things ourselves, but I'd sort of pick out a couple of things. So we use, as I said before, tier 1 batteries in the Far East, and we've helped them in a number of ways work out how we can access renewable energy and work on shared capex projects to deliver sort of renewable energy options for them, which has meant that, you know, a double-digit percentage of the energy that goes into manufacturing a Sky product is from renewable sources, even despite the fact it's done in China. But we've also at the same time done things like energy audits and funded energy audits, so from third parties that will go into those locations and look for opportunities to reduce energy consumption. And more broadly, we've then set up training programs as well for our tier 2 suppliers to look at some of those items, but equally to look at their sort of resource efficiency around recycling opportunities as well. I talked a little bit before about return. You know, a lot of our product comes back. So with our new model that we have of retrieving product when they leave Sky, it means that 1 in 2 products that we build will come back for refurbishment and be reused. So during that, what we're looking to do is to find the right partners where we can, because sometimes cosmetics won't be as good as they can be, is what we can do to recycle that and use those plastics again in our products. We need to be mindful of things like the product's performance under heat and the product's Wi-Fi performance and those kinds of things, but we're looking to solve those problems with other people in the industry as well. I guess that'll do for now, just a few examples. Hope that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely, that's perfect. I think it's a lovely dovetail to bring in Claire now as well, to look at that partnership from a Unipart perspective and other examples as well.
Sure. So we do really value working with Sky, actually, because they are, as I mentioned earlier, just fantastic at challenging us in these areas, and we have found that we've kind of learnt things and then been able to share those with other customers, not only in technology but in our other sectors, and that's been hugely valuable from our perspective. I think more widely, what we've tried to do is develop a sort of individual journey with each of our customers that sort of meets our objectives, but also theirs, because, you know, everybody's obviously signed up to different targets around carbon, etc. So we'll look at, you know, how to source sustainable electricity. Is it appropriate to move into electric vehicles, and how do we navigate that challenge? LED lighting, green gas, packaging. Even for the NHS, we're looking at HBO fuel, for example, and so kind of what's appropriate, I guess, in terms of that particular customer's supply chain and also their own objectives. So taking the NHS, we have a 10-year plan sort of as to how to really help them achieve their target of getting to carbon zero by 2040. Another really key area for us, as I mentioned earlier, is electric vehicles. So clearly we do an awful lot of work in terms of logistics across the automotive sector. That's a massive step change that's kind of part of all of us getting to our sustainability targets, but there's a lot of thinking still to do. So we try to offer storage for batteries at the moment, in terms of bringing condition-based monitoring in with that. So can we kind of check state of charge and make sure that we as far as possible avoid events. But one exciting thing we're working on at the moment, in collaboration with 3 other partners, is Project Detain, and that's looking sort of further down the supply chain in terms of what happens to these batteries at the other end of it all, you know. And so we're looking at intelligent solutions in terms of, you know, how do you prevent the thermal runaway events, and more importantly, what do you do with them at the end? Can you repair them? Can you recycle them? Can we, you know, really interesting examples you see out there in terms of second life use of batteries, which is clearly the direction that we've all got to go in. And the other interesting point for me on collaboration is not just customers and our suppliers, which has been fantastic. You know, so some of our suppliers have been so helpful when we were on the plastic journey, for example, and kind of we wanted packaging that didn't exist to meet our objectives, you know, that had never been near anywhere plastic, and So we kind of had this this hilarious thing where we developed what we called a Rosbox after one of our people, just because she was so passionate about, you know, exactly what was needed, and worked in collaboration with the supplier. But I think that the people element's really important for us as well. You know, clearly we are basically a people company. That's the service that we offer, is having passionate, fantastic people. So we've had loads of input from across our business. I think it's fair to say everybody's really passionate about sustainability and the circular economy, and wants to know what we're doing about it, and wants to be part of helping us get there. So we're planning to mark World Environment Day, actually, that's coming up next month. I don't know where this year's gone, but it is imminent now, the 11th of June. So you know, well, that's the day we're doing it. It's actually on the 5th, which is Saturday. But we're planning sort of a whole series of events, actually, just to get lots of input from people in terms of in your operation, in your site where you work, what more could we do, you know, and really come at us, challenge things. Let's not take anything as read. And I'm really sure, actually, that we're going to get some quite hard challenges, you know, that we'll be sitting there saying, well, that's going to be quite expensive, but you know, that's absolutely what we've got to do, and we've got to just embrace that and go on that journey. So for me, collaboration kind of comes from all angles, from customers and suppliers, from internally, you know, how we work together. You know, using Giles's language earlier, it is a crisis, and we've all got to kind of do our bit to move it forward.
I love that. Again, the importance of culture there, and it's kind of that permission, that safe space. In fact, almost like really encouraging it, fostering that dare to challenge, and really embracing that. That is so important, and just making sure all voices are heard and showing it's important. You know, whatever level of the organisation is. You know, we talk about like a shared responsibility model for things like cybersecurity. I think it's the same thing about sustainability as well, and it's having that kind of ethos and approach to dealing with these challenges that comes across really strongly. That's great, Claire. Thank you very much. And I'd love to go back to Alex now as well on this one as well. So from your work with Coventry University and other partners, obviously, as well. What's some examples from you, Alex, on this one?
So to be frank, like we generally try to approach it from different perspectives. So first thing would be to, first of all, again, from academic perspective, to try to make sure the students understand all these different cases. So for example, the ones which we are discussing, perhaps I'll referring them to this, to watch this webinar later on. Another one is also to make sure that they're involved themselves in different projects. So it can be like some graduate projects, for example. But also we do some research-related collaborations. So we, for example, collaborate about cut flowers and reverse logistics in relation to some of those packagings and so on. We are trying to also look at PO packaging, and even though it looks like nice, but still it might have some positive and negative consequences. So how to avoid this, and yeah, different areas which are related to this. Also, another important area is that, you know, like once companies are talking about efficiency, so how to increase efficiency, and very often they think it's sustainable, it could be counterintuitive. So sometimes producing something in an efficient way might mean that products might be sold more, and in case product isn't environmentally friendly, or let's say eco-efficient, then eco-effective, sorry, then they might be having that long-term negative, you know, consequence for the environment and for society. That's why we're also trying to research in terms of how to manage those production and logistics and supply chain systems, which not only is based on cost efficiency, but also on environmental efficiency, and on the other hand, like how these products can be delivering the long-term environmental benefits as well. One of the projects which we are also working is about automated, you know, like deliveries, which I know it's very much popular within logistics area. And yeah, so basically we are trying to bring academia and research with close to the industry, and we are happy to, you know, continue in this area. And we have different initiatives, starting from student perspective, ending from the industry engagement perspective.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, the education for the future, but as you were saying, kind of closing research and practice gaps and really informing practice behaviour. I love that. Fantastic, Alex. That's brilliant. And I'll add in one very quick example for time, which would be to maybe have a look at something called the HPC Consortium. And that was a great example of different partners coming together over COVID. So right across, like Alex's point, around academia and research, but also big companies, civil society, individual researchers, and big business and governments coming together. And if you have a look at that, I think it's a really interesting model about how you can get that ecosystem collaboration. In that example around COVID and high performance computing, I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn there for coming together around challenges like climate and sustainability as well. So just a shout out for that project if anybody would like to find out more, because I think it's a really nice example of what we can achieve by coming together. So at that point, I think maybe we can look at now around how Industry 4 and technology is addressing some of the challenges that we face around supply chain and sustainability. So Charles, I'd love to draw into your experience here. I think it suits very well everything you're doing and described in those examples earlier.
Thanks. It's been interesting hearing Alex talk there about how academia is sort of getting closer as well. And we've seen that. I mean, we work quite closely with academics on the software side. Because a lot of the work that goes into software is very academic, intellect-based work. It's not that sort of gut feel trading style, business doing business style of the past. So we're finding there's a lot more collaboration with academia now, which is great. Brings a clash of cultures sometimes, but that's all healthy and good fun to manage. In terms of how technology is moving forward to support or deal with sustainability, I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, I've worked in the physical handling side for many, many years before moving into the software side. And you see, your Sky, Unipart, and a few others, very high profile companies really starting to get ahead of the game, and say, this is what we're going to do. And the snowball starts rolling, it gathers momentum. I remember doing some work with Cisco, for instance, when I was at another company, a repair company. And Cisco were looking at, they had an example where they had silo 1 and silo 2, for want of a better word, and part A and part B were pretty much the same part. Maybe it needed a slight software revision, but it was pretty much the same part. But they run out of part A, they've got loads of part Bs, and they're still frantically out there buying loads of part As. And the solution was well, and Cisco were one of the big sort of founders, or one of the first members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, of course. And they said, well, why are we doing this? Can you bring something intelligent to us that says, that is the same with a slight revision, so we don't end up having to keep on buying parts we don't need and all the badness that comes with that. So I think we're starting to see that ball rolling, where parts interchangeability and revisions are easier made. So whether you flash firmware onto parts, or whether you physically have to change the part, indeed in a logistics center, I think we're seeing a lot more of that. I think the impact of automation, as I said earlier, is more about getting good quality data. Yes, you can automate for efficiency, of course, a lot of companies do. But if you get good quality data, you make better decisions. And we've heard a lot in this COVID pandemic about being data-driven, and Boris and Co saying we're making data-driven decisions. Well, I always kind of smile when I hear that, because I think, well, what's data? Data needs to be information. It needs to be useful. So these need to be information-based decisions, really, not data-based decisions. And I think that's where a lot of the world and a lot of the software companies are really bringing some sort of evolution, or maybe even revolution, to this market, in saying, well, we can help you get good quality data. We can then apply artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever phrase you want to give it, to that data and make it useful for you. So you can avoid the drag on circularity, and you can really profit from it and then drive it forward. I think we look at things like electric vehicles I mentioned earlier on. That's quite a fascinating one. A few months ago, I bought a Tesla. Now, Claire, I'm an absolute petrol head. I bought a Tesla. But you know what? It's impressive. I don't love it, but it is so impressive. It's like a gigantic iPhone. Every month they enable some new feature. And the car gets better. And you think, well, why would I want to change? Maybe because actually my vehicle is getting better, because they build the thing. And by the way, Volkswagen, Audi, all the other guys are now starting to do this. They build the item, they have everything in it on board. And then what they do is they gradually enable things with software updates or firmware updates. So again, you can extend the life of the vehicle. You don't have to have so many different variants in the market, which end up going to massive airfields and being disposed of, or goodness knows what. So again, it's an example where technology and a bit of common sense, almost as saying, well, just build it and enable it as you go. The customers will love it because they're getting an ever improving product, and it'll have a longer life cycle and we'll have less waste. So I think we're seeing that side of it. And then I think, another thing about automation, yes, you're going to get better quality data, but if you can automate, you can take away this labor cost variant, which means that a lot of things have to be made far, far away from where they're actually, from where their market is, the target market is. And then there's a massive supply chain cost and environmental cost shipping them there. The more you can automate, the more potentially, not in all cases, but potentially, you can meet local needs because you haven't got the labor costs as an inhibitor because you automate it. Yeah, and yes, there's a side issue about jobs and economy and everything else, but history has shown us that humanity adapts. So I think really, there's some examples as to I think how technology, how software, how the big corporates are starting to advance and deal with these moves forward.
Absolutely. I love that point you were making about the software iteration there. So things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, seeing that involved in far more sectors now. And you're absolutely right. In fact, it's not only is it improving the customer experience, it's actually reducing risks around change management. So it's another shared value option again, isn't it? So I love that, Charles. Some fantastic examples there. And I think one I would say around challenges as well is reducing data waste. Because there's an e-waste aspect to some of this as well, but also around automation, AI, ML model development. We've got a lack of models actually going into production that can also create waste. So for me, that's one area I'm seeing some really interesting work on. Things like AI ops and model ops are kind of one way to help address some of those challenges as well. Fantastic. So perhaps Giles on this one, I'd love to bring you back in.
Yeah, sure. I just thinking, listening to Charles, just a couple of examples, I guess I would give, and just picking up on the Tesla example. I think what's key for us is software, in that it can go both ways. You can end up creating software that drives the product in the wrong way and generates potentially more returns as a result, because it might expose something in the product. So I think what's important though is that the continued development of software and in terms of user experience and customer utility of the product enables it to stay in customers' homes for as long as possible. And we've still got a big chunk of set-top boxes, for example, with customers that have been there for 10 years or more. So we design stuff and build it to last a long time. We have processes to bring it back, refurbish it, reuse it, but ideally we want to keep it out there as long as possible, and that's software technology helps us to do that. I think the other bit is just in terms of accessing data and information around things like carbon footprint of materials, or sort of audit data. Having information like that at your fingertips drives really good and better decision making around what material should you use when you're developing a product. How exactly should you design it to make sure that it's, has the best carbon footprint possible, and all those kinds of things. And we're only really sort of scratching the surface of that data that's out there. We need to do a lot more work, I think, because it also then feeds into sort of like the sort of the life cycle cost assessments that we're trying to do with products as well, and making those decisions around, if we take maybe a bit of a hit up front in the materials that we use, actually in the longer term, it's a better piece of decision making that we're doing. So those are just two examples I thought I'd share.
Fantastic. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Joe. That's excellent. And perhaps Alex, if I could bring you back in on this one. Thank you.
Is that me?
It is you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. So yeah, it's very interesting. Maybe like again, another popular theme is blockchain nowadays. And once we talk about blockchains, it will be interesting to see, for example, which of those recycling materials or products are related with which of the wastes, and also once taking from producers' perspective and also recycling companies' perspectives, they might be also engaged within the blockchain to see like which of those materials are chemical free, or maybe they have chemicals, but acceptable level of chemicals, so they can be used in certain level, Also, it's good from consumer perspective to understand how we can engage consumers and how we can get their buy-in into this recycling and reuse perspective. So we might have, for example, some digital token within the blockchains that in case they will be collecting certain number of tokens, then they might be getting something in discounted price or for free. and also to make sure that they don't just waste like those resources, but they bring it back into the loop, into circular loop. From big data perspective, that's another interesting thing. So, for example, some major waste companies might be looking at different wastes in different areas. And for example, in case they notice that some areas or some regions have more waste, they might be trying to educate people, so target those particular consumers to avoid this kind of waste. It can be also about the companies who, for example, through big data might be analyzing where they have most waste, and how they can reduce it. Have some modeling tools in order to model, these production systems and supply chain systems, and try to understand that's where we can cut on waste. That's where we can integrate new material, which is perhaps chemical free, which can be recycled even easier. And it can be not anymore closed loop, which means once company is selling the product, then some part of the product is recycled and getting back to the producer. But it can be open loop as well. So for example, one industry can produce a product, but then the reverse logistics can work through another industry. For example, Japanese car manufacturers, perhaps they don't only get steel from manufactured cars, and especially from Japan, but any other steel which would be appropriate for them. Yeah, so it's some different benefits which I can recall. Thank
Fantastic. You. I love that. I think that blockchain example is particularly, I always think it's one of the biggest marriages, really. Blockchain and supply chain is a very natural fit. And I think for embedding traceability and transparency and trust, again, I think that's such a key thing for consumers in particular to trust that data. It's one of the things of our time, I would say. So I think blockchain has a big role to play in that. And it's great to see it's being talked about beyond crypto.
Yeah, sorry, Sal. Just to add that also, a lot of companies have this kind of concern whether they are greenwashing or not, and how consumers are perceiving this. And with this kind of blockchains and data access by consumers, then companies can avoid this worry. So they can just do perfect things in an environmentally friendly, sustainable way, and don't worry about what consumers think, because it will be in front of their consumers.
Absolutely, well put. Thank you, Alex. That's brilliant. And just conscious of time a little here, so I wonder if perhaps Nicola or Claire could come in with one further example from your perspective.
Sure. I think we're all becoming technology companies now a little bit, aren't we? So we've invested in a sort of technology and data science team with a view really to trying to help our customers create a more intelligent supply chain. So the areas that, because all of this goes to trying to achieve your objectives. To your point, the more things are visible, and the more you have what I would term insight-driven decisions rather than data. Picking up on Charles's point. So in the interest of time, I guess one of the products that we're looking at is Dragonfly, and that's about trying to make sure that customers don't have more inventory than they need. So sort of embedding artificial intelligence just to generate that better level of thinking. And the pandemic's been a fantastic example of that. Without artificial intelligence, no system would have foreseen the impact of something like Brexit or a pandemic on their inventory requirements. So that's the sort of area that we're going down, and also looking at supply chain visibility.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you, Claire. I appreciate you sharing those. Again, more tangible projects. It's fantastic. The kind of collection we're pulling together here from these different areas. It's fantastic. So I think one more area to focus on before we bring in audience questions, and that would be legislation. I think it's such an important point because it can lag behind, particularly with tech developments. And I would say legislation is driving sustainability now, right to repair, POPs, etc. So I'd love to drill into how this is affecting circular economy in your company or organisation. So Alex, from your perspective, I'd love you to get the ball rolling on this one.
Thank you, Sally. So I would just maybe concern two things. So one is persistent organic pollutants, which is POP. And these are pollutants which are not only locally produced, but they are also distributed globally through different products, through recycling very often. And interesting thing is interesting perspective to capture from this is how we can make sure that the remanufacturing of things or recycling will not be involving, this kind of persistent organic pollutants. And of course, different countries are working and governments together with companies and society are working against some of the chemicals. As far as I know, there is a Stockholm Convention on toxic recycling, and some kind of like different POP related materials. And the thing is, sometimes some countries are not complying, or maybe they might be complying, but they would be opting out from this kind of like compliance regarding POP related materials. However, in case POP can be eliminated from this cycle, then perhaps those recycled materials can be used widely, so they can have more, like production places, so they can be acting as a resource for wider products. So that's one. And another is right to repair. That's another area of circular economy, which is now becoming, again, more important. As far as I'm aware, government, the ministers promised that they would be allowing this like regulation to come into effect this summer, that consumers, I don't know exactly which kind of goods, but at least I know some of the electronics, so consumers will be able to repair it. So which means the consumers will have possibility to purchase some parts, have some instructions, because only having a right to repair doesn't mean they will repair it safely. They need to have appropriate guidance and knowledge. And also different companies, including mobile phone producers, perhaps they will be having more materials. They might be selling their products as repairable products, which is more value added for the consumer. And as you know, like mobile phones, some of us prefer to, for example, have new mobile phone every few months, but some of us maybe not, and they would prefer to have the same mobile phone longer. And also consumer trends towards recycling is becoming like more like a hedonic value. So they like to be environmentally friendly. And yeah, so it's like a cycle which needs to be looked from both perspectives, from consumer perspectives, from producers, and also from regulators as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, I think some positive step forwards, and I think my only comment on that would be just making sure the awareness is there, because as you mentioned, there can be some differences across different nations, national variations even around these things. A bit like we have with cybersecurity, there can be different rules and compliance requirements depending on where you are in the world. So helping organisations to kind of keep up and reduce complexity, again, one of the things that seems to be a real challenge for so many people at the moment. So having more consistency and reducing complexity around this is kind of my response to that. But overall, incredibly positive step forwards. I totally agree, Alex, absolutely. So perhaps if I could pass that back to Giles now, how's this impacting you at Sky?
So on the POP side of things, I think it obviously casts a certain amount of doubt in the secondary markets for some materials. People are unsure as to trading and all that kind of stuff, because some of our revenue models are based on where things make sense to harvest and sell on, but then we should do that. So whether that's things like hard disk drives and so on. So we've been through quite an extensive amount of testing, etc., to make sure that all of the things that we have and we use don't have the stuff in there that people don't want, these sort of organic pollutants. So that's just something that we need to keep an eye on. And and as I've said before, with our vertically integrated supply chain and our sort of very scrutinous approach to compliance and audit and so on, it just means that we're really clear about what goes into our product. With regards to the right to repair, at the moment, because of our ownership model of product, it's not directly applicable because we own the products that are in customers' homes. If there is a fault or an issue with them, we will swap them out, refurbish them, and use them again and again and again if required. So right now, I'm not overly concerned about it. However, as we look forward, we might look to change our model or do something different and so on. And then we need to be careful and mindful of the right to repair, which, to be clear, is about making parts available. It's not necessarily empowering the end consumer to be able to repair something themselves, but it's making parts available into the market, is my understanding. I think I've got that right broadly, but yeah, it's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that clarification as well. I think it's an important one. Thank you, Giles. Appreciate that. And perhaps to Nicola now. I'd love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Giles is right clearly on the things that we're all sort of working on. I think just picking up on the right to repair and how that might influence certainly how we work in supply chain and how we work with the OEMs. Clearly the OEMs will need to make stuff more repairable. There are quite a few elements of many technology devices that you have to break it. You can't take one bit off another bit without breaking one bit, and clearly manufacturers now are going to have to look more at that. These parts that basically you can't fix, they just break. So I know quite a lot of the OEMs are really looking at what that means for them and making stuff repairable, as well as OEMs talking to us about things like, well, they're going to have to be able to, a consumer needs to now be able to buy a Samsung LCD from somewhere. Where is a consumer going to buy a Samsung LCD from? So, are you going to be able to go on, apple.com or samsung.com and buy a part for a phone versus just a phone? So, we have started talking to people about how that might work, what the supply chain might be for parts. And I guess one of our concerns is that most of these things are not easy to repair. So, we're right up there with fighting for everything being repairable. We might see quite a lot of secondary repairs from people who've given it a go the first time round, which will be an interesting new market potentially for us. But
that could be
certainly that kind of, yeah. Well, I wouldn't even attempt it, clearly, as I wouldn't recommend a lot of people. But people do watch YouTube and try and figure out how to repair their washing machines and all the rest of it. And the initiative on Right to Repair is a great one in terms of trying to keep them in customers' hands and trying to keep things working for longer and keep those precious metals and products in there. But I think it will be an interesting evolution that particularly the OEMs will need to go on in terms of making their products more repairable.
Absolutely. I think renaissance of repair cafes, that type of approach we could be seeing soon.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right, I literally will go to Charles now for one more brief example, if I may, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief. I mean, lots of areas of legislation in this market. One is, of course, the WEEE legislation, which is, I think everybody's found it challenging, let's say, across Europe, because each country applies it in their own way. And if you are a European player of one type or another, and it can be even worse in Asia, by the way, but it's very hard to see legislation applied inconsistently. So there's if you're going to apply legislation, try and keep it consistent. Otherwise, you're going to have companies, that have to operate at the top end of that legislation for maybe a market that doesn't require the top end service. And therefore those companies will then be not competitive. So legislation's got some difficulty behind it. So that's WEEE. GDPR, of course, if you're doing devices or connected devices with information on them, it absolutely has to be totally clear. That's one that. Being an American company, of course, they're extraordinarily tight on that because it's such a litigious society. So there's that has a huge impact. And somebody mentioned earlier, it might be Giles, auditability. I think again, you're looking at the software in your systems to be able to have a clear audit trail all the way through as to what's happened to that device for any of this legislation. Whether it's data or whether it's reuse or materials, you've got to have a clear audit trail all the way through. So I think they're three kind of key areas that I can see that, again, you need the right systems to track it. And quite often big companies just don't have the right systems. They have very, very siloed systems. And if the legislation changes in one country and not another, how do you cope with that?
Brilliant. Those three takeaways and that tech integration to support it. I think you're spot on, Charles. Thanks so much. That's a really, really great succinct reply. Thank you. And at this point, if I could go to Rob now to bring in an audience question, please. Thank you.
Yes, we have a few questions, but please keep them coming. This one, I'll start with the observation, and then it goes on to a question. The thing that's caught my attention is the gap to driving change and how this actually translates to the service partners receive, i.e. delivering the service, know its impact, and if it's profitable, the contracts that people sign, etc. Why do long contracts that do not share the risk seem the norm?
Interesting question. Can I throw that out to the panel generally, if anybody would like to come in specifically on that one?
Corporate inertia, it's probably as good a reason as any. Procurement departments. I hope there's nobody from procurement watching. My wife's in procurement. Yeah, I think it's just a lot of it is inertia. It's a fantastic point. And if you're going to provide benefit to a partner, you should have. It sounds idealistic, this, but you should have enough confidence in your own product to put up and say, well, if we're not providing benefit, you can cancel it. Obviously you put commercials around it, but there's no need necessarily for a super long contract. I can count on one hand in 30 odd years how many times I've had to go back to a contract. It's kind of I think it's a hangover. It's people covering. But there we go. That's my view.
Absolutely, a great point there. Did anybody else want to come in on that one before we go to another question?
Yeah, just maybe quickly. So once it comes to contracts and like long-term relationships, very important is to have this mutual value or mutual commitments. And very often in relationships, they emphasize strongly on cost and quality, but there are many other relational aspects, including commitment, for example, trust, mutual values, including sustainability, for example, and benevolence, which means that not always you deliver, but at least you show that you are willing to deliver and they can trust you that you will do maximum what you can, other than checking you all the time. Also contracts have exit clauses very often, and it's not only thing which keeps the relationship going. Especially once it comes to circular economy, it needs to transform the relationships. That's why it needs to be open, transparent, and needs to be mutual beneficiary and committed as well. Otherwise, it will not sustain long.
Absolutely. So very much those value aspects coming into that, Alex. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Nicola, Claire, would you like to come in on this one?
Well, I think there's some great points being made already. I guess the other dynamic, because ultimately it is about partnership and trust and not what's written down in any document. But the other dynamic, of course, is there is often a need to invest in a supply chain as kind of transformation is required. So I guess that's quite often what's at the heart of kind of timescales is, there's kind of practicalities around amortizing investments, whether that's in automation, whether it's in kind of systems and technology, whether it's actually about going on a sustainability journey together and not wanting to kind of move around therefore every year or so. So it's a complicated topic, isn't it? We could talk about this one the entire afternoon, I reckon. But certainly from what I see in the market more and more, I think there's generally an ability to have a sensible conversation, and there's a balanced understanding on both sides that says, this is what I need to bring, and I must fulfill my side of it, and this is what I need from you, and I think hopefully that gets embodied in a contract that gets put in a drawer and hopefully never drawn out again until it's renewed.
Fantastic, that's great, Claire. Thank you very much. I think we've got some great points on that one already. So perhaps if I go back to you, Rob, we'll try and get in a new question.
Yeah, this is a question about omnichannel, and does the panel think that omnichannel is an issue when it comes to triage? And I suppose that affects returns. I guess that's what it's asking.
Great question, great word. I think if I go to Giles actually first on this one, that would be really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how qualified I am to work in this, given that we don't have any shops and everything is direct and online. But so I would argue that we are starting to open shops. Yeah, there is a challenge, right? Because you need to, with returns management, is having the right diagnostics in place, right? And having worked in retail for 20 years before I started at Sky, it was always a challenge is managing the diagnostic capability that wasn't in a store, but also managing the incentives as well appropriately with people. So yeah, it'll always be a challenge. Yeah. That's about as much as I got.
No problem at all. Perhaps, Nico, if I could bring you back in on this one, because I know this is an area you've done a lot of work, and I did hear something about returns as part of that partnership. So I'd love to hear more from your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it's really building. My thoughts went to where Giles' thoughts had gone to, really building on Giles's point. It is the consistency of diagnostics and consistency of data stroke information, not to get Charles on his data information bit. So it is that consistency that can be quite difficult, that you'll get different types of approaches. But there has been a lot of work, certainly within sort of technology companies, as Giles referred to there, to harmonize as much as possible across the channels. So whether somebody's trying to book a return on a website, or whether they've gone into a store, or whether they're calling a call center, there's been a lot of work to try and harmonize that, so the customer gets a similar experience wherever they go, but also such that the information that is applied to that is really good. We've all spent time trying to stop the drop-down list, because obviously the first one on the drop-down list is the one that's picked the most, and other comes up all the time. And let me tell you, when a repair centre gets what's the fault other, it's not really very useful in terms of trying to figure it out and repair that device. And we've all put stuff around that. We have call centres that then will call a customer to say, we've now got your device and we don't really understand what your issue is from what we've got here, so could you talk to me about it? And that often ends up in an education conversation again, where you're going to have that conversation with the customer to say, so if I turn it this way and I do this, it does what? Right, okay, well, what you're doing there is you're pressing, the volume button at the same time, whatever, So I think there is actually a lot of activity there on omni-channel to try and harmonise it, but it is a difficult conundrum that the industry has.
Absolutely. I might throw in a purposeful tangent on sustainable mobility on this one as well, like that last mile of travel, and interconnecting, buying a ticket and getting onto the train, and then the online aspects around that. There's a lot of interconnection that's needed there to enhance smart mobility. And there's something I've got coming out on that very subject, but it's a really interesting one. I think that's got a lot of sustainability principles involved in getting that right as people return to work as well. Charles, did you want to come in on that one at all?
Yeah, just briefly, I'm kind of building on what Nicola and Giles said. I think having again, you can have software, you can have apps and things that are downloaded to devices which diagnose the devices. You can do that. You can put devices within stores or test relatively low cost test equipment within stores, which will take again some of the subjectivity out of it. People people want to return devices for lots of different reasons. Some people just want to return it because it's a remorse return. I think that's 15% in America, for instance. It's huge. So having the ability to use, again, consistent test methodologies, either online from a call center, in the store, and also something that we're looking at, and I think it will come in very, very much in the next 2 or 3 years, is augmented reality testing and support. That's something that you talk about, right to repair and all this. I think people can look at YouTube, but we're starting to now look at things like, well, we have automation within sites. We don't want to have site engineers sitting there. We're a software company. We want the customer to do it. So we can look at augmented reality so they can actually see what they're doing. A whole variety of different ways to try and address that omni-channel to do it consistently. Because when you test it at the front, you don't then want to do it again and again and again all the way down the line. Do it once, do it right, keep it efficient. So, yeah.
Really interesting. So consistency. I love your point there about kind of democratization around testing. That's really interesting. I might come back to you separately on that, Charles. That's really interesting. Thank you. Rob, can we go for another question, please?
Yes. Is there a driver to repair more products closer to the point of consumption damage with the carbon element, knowing a lot of these devices are repaired in cheaper geographies for labour, i.e. Eastern Europe?
Interesting. Thank you. Great question there. Claire, could I bring you in on this one, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably better people qualified to answer this than me, but my personal views are there's always been a bit of a dilemma between where things are more cost effective, or certainly at a unit price level, not necessarily at an end-to-end level, versus environmentally. Of course, it should be done locally, but there's obviously also the kind of to get to a certain level of repair, you need a certain level of skill, and you don't want people sitting around. So I think it's something that companies wrestle with a lot, and you kind of see quite often you see things kind of going to Eastern Europe, coming back from Eastern Europe. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see which end of that spectrum plays out. I certainly hope that we start doing more locally in the UK, and kind of push the economy, but recognise obviously that there's a challenge to sort of meet the cost levels that are potentially possible elsewhere. But I wonder if one of the kind of outputs of the last couple of years is something that pushes us in that direction, as I see more and more people really focusing on supply chain resilience and doing things as locally as possible.
Great points, thank you. Can I throw this one open to the rest of the panel? I think maybe Alex, from an academic perspective, would be really interesting on this, but I'd love to kind of throw it open because I'm conscious of time. So anybody who would like to really come in on that, please say.
Yeah, just very quickly, maybe like once it comes to, repairing somewhere else and consumption places somewhere else, it usually again generates this logistical system problems, yeah, because maybe it might be cost efficient to move it there, but then again, we have extra emissions. Then we have more risks because this might not always arrive safely. Usually it is, but not always it might be. And I also like, for example, I guess I can mention is John Lewis example, right? So in case you return something for any reason, it can be maybe it needs some repairing, but usually maybe you just change. For example, you bought a laptop and next day you change like your decision and you want to return and you open it already. They might, I don't know, like my experience was that they might decide to take it back, and rather than sending it back to the producer, which might be totally in different country, or to the main, representatives, they might be just simply giving discount of 20% or 15 or whatever it is, I don't exactly remember, and sell it straight away. So which might be more profitable. It's definitely greener, and also a lot of consumers, they don't have this kind of like desire to buy untouched goods. It's still brand new almost, because I mean, it's not brand new, but it gives the same kind of characteristics which brand new can give, at least on functional level. And yeah, many customers are buying this way. So it's also can be another solution. So not always repairing can be the best option. Very often it can be simply, like remodifying or doing something with that in order to avoid sending far away from the consumption place. Yeah, so just
absolutely. I think another thing to look at potentially is a change in business models around consumption-based business model, kind of paying for what you use. I'm seeing a lot of evolution in that area at the moment, so that might be something to look for as well. So that's something that's certainly growing in a lot of the tech organizations that I'm working with. So it's interesting, and again, it's been catalyzed by the consumer affecting that change. So if I go back to Rob, I'll see if we've got time for one more question.
Ali, I was just going to make one point, and I think what the question exposes is a broader set of assessment criteria that as businesses we need to start making, which is not just a pure P&L impact, right? It is about what's the carbon impact of your decision and how do you reconcile that or offset that somewhere else in your supply chain and managing it accordingly. And certainly, we're starting to try and work through over the next couple of years is how we almost create like a ghosted carbon P&L that sits next to our financial P&L in terms of the decisions that we make in the supply chain.
Fantastic, appreciate that, Giles. That's a great point, thank you. And Rob, if I could bring you back in, thank you.
Well, I was just about to ask a question that Giles has just answered, so he's obviously some sort of mind reader, but
that's impressive.
Maybe just the last one. It's about refurbished devices being as good as new. Does the panel think that customers might prefer a reused product in the future based on their sustainability conscience?
Really interesting. Would anybody particularly like to come in on this one? I was thinking potentially Charles, but if anybody would particularly like to come forward, please do so.
I'll kick off. I mean, would they prefer it? I think it's a value decision. I mean, some people will do it, yes, I prefer it for environmental reasons. Other people will say, well, if I can get a refurbished device for a lot less money, then I'll take it. I've got a few figures to back it up. There's 13% year-on-year growth in used devices, in smartphones, second life smartphones, 3% in new ones. And that 13% is growing. And as you make it easier and as you build customer trust in that reused device, and that relates to all that I was saying earlier on about having objective and proper testing and grading on the way back so the customer gets a good experience, then absolutely, that's going to be a catalyst for that figure to grow hugely.
Perfect, absolutely. I think it's informing that choice as well, isn't it? Whether it's a cost-based one or one that's coming from the sustainability angle, it's informing it, it's giving that opportunity to be able to do so. Brilliant.
I think there's a couple of things with this, right? To have a refurbished device, you had to have had a new device at some point in the market, right? So there's an element of supply and demand on this thing as well, right? An equation, which is quite complex. I think the other bit is what drives new device adoption is going to be innovation in the product offering. And, when those things are flattening out, which depend on what your views are about mobile phones at the moment might be now, then people will quite happily move to refurbished, as long as there's a reason for it in the value context, I think would be my view.
I agree, and I think it also comes to sort of our own personal decision-making criteria, which might be similar on a personal level to your point about a carbon P&L. You know, for example, I've got a friend who works for Friends of the Earth, and she prides herself on not having bought any brand new clothes for the last 10 years, and you know, applies that to a lot of areas, because it's more important to her to be living in line with her kind of values on where we're going with climate change, etc. And I wonder if more of us will start thinking in that way, you know, again, particularly after last year, where there's a little bit more of a focus on what's important. So let's hope we all do more of that.
Fantastic. Absolutely. It's enabling the conditions for those choices to be made, isn't it? I think that's absolutely spot on. Well, that's fantastic. I think we're drawing to the close. I can't believe how quick the time has gone, frankly. So it leaves it to me to thank an amazing panel. Honestly, this is a conversation to be continued, I think. I think it's been excellent. So thank you, every single one of you. It's been a real pleasure to host the session today. I'd like to just hand over to Rob to close things out. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you very much for joining. And I'd like to echo Sally's sentiment and thank the panel for their time and expertise today. And I would also like to thank her for moderating. It's been a fantastic session. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Cheers.
Very much.